1. And there he published this first major article from Adventist, really explaining Revelation 13 and America and prophecy as we have been looking at. And there he wrote, we can read it, he says, an image to the beast. This is 1851. He said, an image to the beast that received the deadly wound must be made. That beast was, in truth, a church clothed with civil power and authority to put to death the saints of God. An image to the beast then must be another church clothed with civil power and authority to put the saints of God to death. And then he said this can be nothing else but the corrupt and fallen Protestant church. Right there, right at the very beginning, before the Seventh-day Adventist Church even started, those in our early Adventist movement saw clearly that this text was describing a false religious revival that would lead to a religious tyranny, that this last superpower of Bible prophecy would enact and would become global. That is a position that was strengthened and made even clearer some years later by Ellen White, 38 years later, and she published the book Great Controversy in the year 1888. And there you can see our understanding deepening and becoming more clear about what is this image to the beast. Concerning the image to the beast, in the Great Controversy, Ellen White wrote that in order for the United States to form an image of the beast, the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish her own ends. Page 443 of Great Controversy. In this quote, very important quote, who is controlling who? It's not the government controlling the religious power, it's the other way around. It's what we least expect. It's the church controlling the government. And there's a big difference, isn't there? The image to the beast will be accomplished when the religious power in America takes control of civil government for the enforcement of certain religious agenda. According to these prophecies in our books, that's our future. And Christianity becomes dominant and overbearing in this country. Can you feel it coming? Or is it hard to imagine with much of what we've had from the other side? Ellen White explained that if you want to track the early progress of the image to the beast being built, don't just listen to what judges are saying at the Supreme Court. Don't just listen to what legislators are saying in Congress. Listen to what the pastors are saying from American pulpits. This is on page 445 of the same book, Great Controversy. She writes, when the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. So how do we measure the progress of the image to the beast? Where do we watch in those early stages when it's getting ready to be formed? Is it the leading power brokers in this world, the leading, I don't know, business tycoons, the global elites? According to Ellen White, this is key. The best place to track the early progress of the image to the beast is by watching the leading churches of America. In 2025, you can see it happening. If you tune into the popular pastors in America today, you will notice that the tone is changing. Today, Christian leaders in America are feeling hurt, wounded, and angry about how things have gone in this country. They sense that it's time to take a more aggressive approach and get this nation back to God. Have you heard it? Still on page 445, she continues that the image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism, which will be developed when the Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. The Protestant churches will seek the aid of civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. That's what the image to the beast represents, is that church dogma will gain the upper hand over secular dogma. Now, here in Revelation, we see that sometimes those that have been the underdog and those that have been persecuted will gain the upper hand and become the persecutor. Let me show you this right here from the text in Revelation. Back in chapter 12, there's a symbol given. It's the earth. And in chapter 12, the earth provided a haven for the persecuted church. Revelation 12 and verse 16 says, the earth helped the woman. That's the earth helped the church, helped God's believers, helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. But notice that the same symbol, the earth, in Revelation 13, it goes from being associated with those who are persecuted to being associated with those who are persecuting. It says in Revelation 13 and verse 11 and 12, then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So whereas the earth is associated with the persecuted in Revelation 12, the earth is associated with the persecutors in Revelation 13. Persecuted becomes the persecutor. Have we ever seen that in church history before? Church history is full of examples, beginning with Christians in the 4th century, who with the help of Constantine eventually became persecutors. They had suffered much persecution under the Roman Empire, but in a matter of years, they gained control and led to Christianity becoming the persecutor. This transition from persecuted to persecutor happened not only to Catholics, but also to Protestants. In Germany, the Lutherans, in the 16th century, who fought hard for their own religious liberties, were not willing to extend those same liberties to Anabaptists. The one things that both Catholics and Lutheran princes agreed on at the 1529 Diet of Spires was that Anabaptists could not be tolerated in Germany. Many Anabaptists died at the hands of both Lutherans and Catholics in the following years. In 16th century Germany, the persecuted Protestants became the persecuting Protestants. In Geneva, Switzerland, after John Calvin gained independence from Rome and secured religious liberty for himself and his church, he burned Michael Servetus to the stake for holding dissident beliefs about the Trinity. In Geneva, Switzerland, after John Calvin gained independence from Rome and secured religious liberty for himself and his church, he burned Michael Servetus at the stake for holding dissident beliefs about the Trinity. In Geneva, the persecuted again became the persecutor. And finally, and unfortunately, in the American colonies, the same pattern continued when Puritans fled to the New World to escape persecution from the King of England and the Church of England. But when arriving in America, Puritans established religious liberty for themselves and nobody else, which is not religious liberty at all. They fined, imprisoned, and executed people who did not conform to Puritan beliefs and practices in Massachusetts and other colonies. And colonial America, also, the persecuted became the persecutor. But Roger Williams broke the cycle when he envisioned a new colony that would protect religious liberty for not only Baptists like himself, but for all religious minorities, including atheists, Jews, and Muslims. Because of his commitment to the separation of church and state, Rhode Island became a shelter for persecuted people of all persuasions. And today, the Seventh-day Adventist Church follows in the tradition of Roger Williams and advocating for a robust separation of church and state. We believe in protecting the human dignity and the religious convictions of all including those who believe very differently than us. Today, if you haven't noticed, the doctrine of separation in church and state is fiercely debated. I felt this tension personally just a few years ago in Spokane, Washington, when I was a pastor there. And at that time, I was graciously invited to represent the Seventh-day Adventists on an interfaith religious liberty panel that was organized by the Church of Latter-day Saints. And at this religious liberty event, I sat between a Roman Catholic priest and a Buddhist guru, people with very different beliefs than my own. I was also joined at the table by a non-denominational pastor and a conference president for the Mormon Church. The panel was moderated by a pastor from the Salvation Army. And I considered it a privilege to have that opportunity to share a few Seventh-day Adventist perspectives with this diverse audience. At one point during the panel, I shared how Seventh-day Adventists have a strong history of advocating for the separation of church and state, an ethic brought to America by Baptist pastor and founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams. When I spoke about the separation of church and state, the moderator of the panel immediately questioned me, saying, "Now, Joe, when you say separation of church and state, you're talking about the state staying out of the church. You're not saying that the church should stay out of the state, right?" I have since realized that when that Salvation Army pastor asked me this question, he spoke for millions of Americans who believe that the separation of church and state is a one-way street. They believe that the government should stay out of church, but the church should not stay out of government. And this is, I think, where the real rub is today, isn't it? This is where Adventists better know our position. You know, when we study the history of Rome, there were times when the emperor controlled the Pope, and there were other times when the Pope controlled the emperor. Both were a problem. Adventists believe that the separation of church and state goes both directions. We are both against the church controlling the state and against the state controlling the church. Our understanding of Revelation 11 and the French Revolution and the examples of communist dictators around the world really makes it impossible for us to be apathetic towards any state that seeks to control the church. But our understanding of Revelation 13, of 4th century history of Catholics in Rome, the examples of Lutherans in Germany, Calvinists in Geneva, Puritans in America, also makes it impossible for Adventists to be neutral towards churches that use the state to enforce their agenda. God has given us Bible prophecy so that we can be awake and watchful to the threats that come from all sides. Today, there is a strong temptation for Adventist Christians to compromise our principles for the sake of politics. And while we reject the doctrines of Babylon, let's not get drunk on the politics of Babylon. Today, many believers are becoming intoxicated by the politics of Babylon. It's easy, isn't it, to sip a little of the wine of Babylon once in a while until we start feeling relaxed with it. There's no doubt that the image to the beast will be a very attractive moral project in the beginning. Those early stages to bring this nation back to God, to bring people back to God. It will be something that will unite Christians everywhere. It will be exciting, and yet it will end terribly. God has called Seventh-day Adventists to the stage for such a time as this. We have the prophecies of Revelation to help us navigate the complexities of our world today. And let us not now neglect our rich religious liberty heritage, but step forward with more courage than ever before. This is no time for Adventists to change our interpretations of prophecy. Rather, Adventists need our prophetic heritage today more than ever, so that we do not cave to the demands of the crowds. Will you join me in seeking the Lord through deeper prayer, more diligent study, a humble attitude? Do you sense your need for God to guide us and to strengthen us for the complex challenges that we face in this year? May God do something very special in each one of us to soften our hearts, to open our minds. May we not get pulled in the various directions, but stand firm right where God has called us to be.